The tattoo on Sarah Mitchell's left hand had been there for 11 years, but she still touched it sometimes without thinking, a nervous habit, fingers tracing the faded black letters that spelled, Medic 7, across her knuckles. Most people never noticed it. The ones who did usually assumed it was just some youthful rebellion, a remnant from a wilder time in her life. They were wrong, but Sarah never corrected them. The truth was buried too deep, wrapped in too much pain, and she'd learned a long time ago that some stories were better left untold. At 34, Sarah worked as a hospital technician at County General, changing bedsheets and emptying bedpans and restocking supply closets. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and steady was all she'd been looking for since she'd come home 7 years ago. The other techs complained about the hours, the pay, the way the nurses treated them like they were invisible. Sarah never complained. She showed up on time, did her work without fuss, and went home to her small apartment where she lived alone with a cat named Riley and a refrigerator that hummed too loud in the silence. Nobody at the hospital knew about her past. Nobody knew she'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic with the Marines. Nobody knew about the IED that had torn through her convoy, about the 3 months she'd spent in recovery at Walter Reed, about the medical discharge that had ended her career and sent her home with a head full of nightmares and a Purple Heart she kept in a shoebox under her bed. Sarah preferred it that way. Being invisible meant being safe. It meant nobody asked questions she didn't want to answer. The morning everything changed started like any other. Sarah clocked in at 6 a.m., grabbed her supply cart, and began her rounds on the 3rd floor. She was restocking the linen closet near the ICU when she heard the commotion, raised voices, running feet, the sharp sound of someone shouting orders. In a hospital, chaos usually meant one of 2 things: someone was dying, or someone had just died. Sarah kept her head down and kept working. Not my problem, she told herself. That was the mantra she lived by now. Not my problem, not my fight, not anymore. But then she heard the voice. We need a medic. Somebody get me a goddamn medic, now. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, so visceral she actually stumbled backward into the supply cart. That voice. She knew that voice. It had been 11 years, but she would have recognized it anywhere, rough and desperate and carrying the particular edge of someone who'd seen too much death to be polite about it. Her feet were moving before her brain caught up. She abandoned the cart and followed the sound down the hallway to one of the isolation rooms. Through the window, she could see the scene inside: a patient on the bed, monitors screaming alarms, 2 nurses working frantically, and a doctor she didn't recognize. But it was the man standing off to the side who made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. He was older than she remembered, grayer at the temples, with new lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. But it was him, Staff Sergeant Marcus Cole, her squad leader, the man who'd pulled her out of the wreckage of that Humvee, who'd carried her to the medevac bird while she'd bled out all over his uniform, who'd visited her every single day during those first terrible weeks at Walter Reed. The man she'd pushed away when the guilt became too heavy to carry. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway, her hand pressed against the glass, watching as Marcus argued with the doctor. She couldn't hear the words through the thick door, but she could read the fury in his body language, the desperate anger of someone watching a friend die and being powerless to stop it. The patient on the bed was young, maybe early 20s, with the distinctive high and tight haircut of an active-duty Marine. Even from where she stood, Sarah could see the scars crisscrossing his exposed arms, the way his chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. The monitors were going crazy, numbers dropping into dangerous territory, and the nurses were struggling to get an IV line in while the doctor barked orders that nobody seemed to be following fast enough. Sarah's training kicked in before her fear could stop her. She pushed through the door, ignoring the startled looks from the nurses, moving straight to the bedside with the kind of calm authority she hadn't used in 7 years. "What's his status?" she asked, her voice steady even as her hands started shaking. The doctor rounded on her. "Who the hell are you?" "This is a restricted." "She's a medic," Marcus interrupted, and the recognition in his eyes when he looked at Sarah was like being stripped naked. "7. What are you doing here?" 7. Nobody had called her that in years. In the Marines, Sarah Mitchell had been Medic 7, assigned to 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. The tattoo on her hand was all that remained of that identity, and hearing Marcus say it out loud made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. "I work here," she said, not meeting his eyes. "What happened to him?" "Respiratory distress, possible pulmonary embolism," the doctor said, clearly deciding that questions could wait. We can't get vascular access, his pressure's tanking, and he's got scar tissue from burns that's making everything 10 times harder. Sarah looked at the young Marine's arms, at the thick keloid scars that covered his veins, and understood immediately. Move, she said to the nurse struggling with the IV. I've got this. She didn't wait for permission. Her hands moved with muscle memory older than her fear, finding the spots between the scar tissue where healthy veins still ran, sliding the catheter in on the first try. Hang normal saline, wide open, she ordered, already moving to assess the patient's breathing. And get me an EKG. If this is a PE, we need to know how big before we start treatment. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah forgot everything except the patient in front of her. She forgot that she was supposed to be just a hospital tech. She forgot that she'd sworn never to do this kind of work again. She forgot about the nightmares and the guilt and all the reasons she'd walked away from medicine. There was only the fight to keep this young Marine alive, the same fight she'd fought 100 times in field hospitals and makeshift aid stations across Afghanistan. By the time they stabilized him enough to transfer to the ICU, Sarah was shaking so badly she had to grip the bedrail to stay upright. The doctor was looking at her with a mixture of confusion and respect, the nurses were whispering to each other, and Marcus was standing in the corner watching her with an expression she couldn't bear to interpret. How did you know what to do? The doctor asked. I used to be a medic, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. A long time ago. That was some of the best emergency medicine I've seen in 20 years. You should be working in the not changing bedsheets. Sarah shook her head. I'm not a medic anymore. She pulled off her gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bin, desperate to get out of the room before she fell apart completely. Excuse me. She made it to the stairwell before the panic attack hit. Her back against the cold concrete wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Her hand found the tattoo, fingers pressing hard enough to hurt, trying to ground herself in something real. The door opened. She didn't need to look up to know it was Marcus. 7, he said softly, and that name, that goddamn name, broke something inside her. Don't call me that. Her voice was ragged. I'm not her anymore. I haven't been her in a long time. Marcus sat down beside her on the dirty stairs, close enough that their shoulders touched. That kid in there. His name is Danny Ramirez. He served with my son in Helmand province. They were both hit by an IED 8 months ago. My son died. Danny survived, but he's been in and out of hospitals ever since. Infections, complications from the burns, now this. Sarah closed her eyes. Of course Marcus's son was dead. The universe had a cruel sense of symmetry. I'm sorry, she whispered. God, Marcus, I'm so sorry. He was 23, wanted to be a teacher when he got out. Had a girlfriend back home, wedding planned for next summer. Marcus's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the ocean of grief beneath it. I keep thinking about all the times I told him stories about our deployments. About you and Thompson and Garcia and all the crazy shit we survived. Made it sound like an adventure instead of the nightmare it was. He joined because of me. Because I made war look noble. You didn't make him do anything, Sarah said. He made his own choice. Did he? Or did he make the choice I raised him to make? Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. Danny was there when it happened. He tried to save him, pulled him out of the burning vehicle even though his own skin was melting off. By the time the medic got there, it was too late. But Danny kept trying, kept doing CPR on a kid who was already gone because he couldn't accept it. Sarah understood that more than she wanted to admit. She'd done the same thing more times than she could count. Fought for people who were already lost because giving up meant admitting defeat. That's why he's here, she asked. The lung thing, he's been having panic attacks since he got stateside. Hyperventilating until he passes out. Couple days ago, his legs started swelling up. Turns out he threw a blood clot, probably from sitting around too much while he was healing. That clot traveled to his lungs. Marcus's jaw tightened. They told me this morning that if we can't get him stable, he might not make it through the week. And I keep thinking, I already lost my son. I can't lose his friend too. I can't lose the last person who was with him when he died. Sarah felt tears sliding down her face and didn't bother to wipe them away. Why are you telling me this? Because I spent 7 years looking for you. 7. After you stopped returning my calls, stopped answering emails, fell off the face of the earth, I needed to know you were okay. Needed to know I hadn't lost you too. You should have stopped looking. Couldn't. You saved my life. You saved half our platoon's lives at one point or another. You were the best medic I ever served with, and then you just disappeared. I had to. Sarah's voice cracked. After the discharge, after the therapy sessions and the medications and all the bullshit about healing and moving forward, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't be Medic 7. That person got people killed. Marcus turned to look at her, his eyes sharp. What are you talking about? You never lost a patient you could save. Yes, I did. I lost Garcia. The name hung between them like a ghost. Corporal Miguel Garcia, 26 years old, father of twin girls he'd never met. He'd bled out in Sarah's arms during that last deployment, victim of a sniper's bullet that had torn through his femoral artery. Sarah had worked on him for 47 minutes, long after everyone else had given up, her hands slick with his blood while she'd begged him to hold on. Garcia's death wasn't your fault, Marcus said firmly. The shooter who killed him, that was whose fault it was. You did everything right. I couldn't save him. You're not God. 7. You never were. You were a medic doing an impossible job in an impossible situation, and you saved more lives than you lost. Garcia wouldn't want you torturing yourself like this. Sarah laughed, a broken sound. You don't know that. You don't know what he'd want because he's dead, and I'm the one who was supposed to keep him alive. They sat in silence for a long time. Sarah could hear the hospital sounds through the stairwell door, intercoms calling for doctors, the distant beeping of monitors, the soft squeak of shoes on linoleum. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The sounds of a world where people died in clean beds instead of dirty desert roads. I need your help, Marcus said finally. Danny's doctor is good, but he doesn't understand what Danny's been through. Doesn't get why a kid with a pulmonary embolism keeps trying to pull out his IVs and run away. Doesn't know how to talk to someone who's seen what we've seen. I'm not qualified. I'm just a hospital tech. Bullshit. You're a combat medic with more field experience than half the doctors in this building. You proved that today. Marcus stood up, offering her his hand. I'm not asking you to be Medic 7 again. I'm just asking you to help me keep one more Marine alive. Can you do that? Sarah looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Every instinct she developed over the past 7 years told her to walk away, to go back to her safe, small life where she changed bedsheets and didn't have to feel anything. But she thought about Danny Ramirez fighting for breath in that hospital bed, about Marcus's son who died in a burning vehicle, about all the ways war kept killing people long after the shooting stopped. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Over the next week, Sarah became Danny's unofficial advocate. She coordinated with his doctors, translated medical jargon into terms he could understand, and sat with him during the worst panic attacks when his lungs felt like they were closing up and he was convinced he was dying. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same haunted desperation she saw in her own mirror every morning. Danny didn't talk much at first. He'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, his jaw clenched tight, refusing to engage with the nurses or the therapists or anyone who tried to help. But Sarah didn't push. She'd just pull up a chair and sit there, sometimes talking about meaningless things like the weather or the terrible hospital coffee, sometimes saying nothing at all. Just being present in the way she wished someone had been present for her. It was on the 4th day that Danny finally spoke to her. You got the tattoo, he said, nodding at her hand. Sarah glanced down at Medic 7, sprawled across her knuckles. Yeah, what unit? 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. I was there from 2010 to 2014. Danny's eyes sharpened with recognition. You were in Sangin. It wasn't a question. Sangin had been one of the deadliest districts in Afghanistan, and anyone who'd served there carried the knowledge like a scar. Sarah had spent 8 months in that hell, watching young Marines get torn apart by IEDs and sniper fire and the grinding daily violence of a war nobody could win. Yeah, she said, I was there. Marcus's son told me about you. About a medic who wouldn't give up on people, who'd run into fire to pull out wounded even when everyone else said it was suicide. Danny's voice was rough. He said you were a legend. Sarah felt her throat close up. I wasn't a legend. I was just trying to do my job. Is that why you're here, doing your job? I don't know why I'm here, Sarah admitted. I told myself I was done with all of this. That I'd left it behind. But you didn't. Danny gestured at the hospital room, at the medical equipment that was keeping him alive. You're still fighting. Sarah didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. How are you feeling today? Any chest pain? Don't do that, Danny said sharply. Don't treat me like I'm just another patient. I know what you're doing, keeping it professional, keeping distance. I do the same thing. But it doesn't work, does it? The shit follows you anyway. He was right, and they both knew it. Sarah sat back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, and for the first time in years, she let herself be honest. I have nightmares, she said quietly. About the people I couldn't save. I wake up sometimes and I can still feel their blood on my hands, still hear them calling for their mothers or their wives or God. And the worst part is that I keep thinking, if I'd been faster, smarter, better, maybe they'd still be alive. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he lifted his scarred arms, the skin still pink and shiny from the burns. I pulled Marcus's son out of that vehicle, grabbed him under the arms and dragged him 20 feet before I realized half his body was gone. But I kept trying to save him anyway. Kept doing chest compressions even though there was this hole in his chest you could see through. The other guys had to physically pull me off him. His voice broke, and now I can't stop thinking, what if I'd been faster? What if I'd gotten to him before the fire spread? What if I'd done something different? It wouldn't have mattered, Sarah said. If the wound was that catastrophic, there was nothing you could have done. That's what everyone keeps telling me. The therapists, the doctors, Marcus. But knowing it in your head and believing it in your gut are two different things. Danny wiped his eyes roughly. How do you live with it? The guilt. Sarah thought about the question for a long time. She thought about Garcia and all the others, about the years she'd spent trying to outrun her memories, about the small, empty life she'd built because it felt safer than risking failure again. Honestly, she said, I don't think you do. Live with it, I mean. Not really. You just carry it. And some days the weight is bearable and some days it's crushing, but you keep carrying it anyway because what else can you do? That's pretty bleak. Yeah, well, war's pretty bleak. Danny almost smiled at that. Then his expression turned serious. Marcus told me you saved his life. That you pulled him out of an ambush and kept him breathing long enough to get to the field hospital. Sarah remembered that day with crystalline clarity. Marcus had taken 3 rounds to the chest, and his lung had collapsed. Sarah had performed an emergency needle decompression in the middle of a firefight, her hands steady even as bullets cracked overhead. She'd thought she was going to die right there with him, but somehow they'd both made it out. I did my job, she said. He also told me you won't accept that you're a hero. That you keep minimizing what you did, like it doesn't count because you were just following your training. Danny leaned forward, his eyes intense. But here's the thing, plenty of people have training. Not everyone has the guts to use it when everything's going to hell. You did. That matters. It doesn't feel like it matters when you remember all the people you couldn't save. Maybe that's the point, though. Maybe the only way to honor the ones we lost is to keep saving the ones we can. Danny gestured at himself. Like me, I'd be dead right now if you hadn't pushed your way into that room last week. The doctor told Marcus that what you did bought them the time they needed to figure out what was wrong. So yeah, maybe you couldn't save everyone. But you saved me. Doesn't that count for something?